Good evening, everyone, and we are so excited to have you joining us for the last week of our Privilege series. It really has been a journey. Sometimes it's been difficult, other times it's been moving, and other times it's just really been great to have a platform to speak about these experiences, these different expressions of privilege that some of us might have been aware of and others not so much. And just from my side, it's been a great time to connect with you also on Tuesday nights for our discussion groups and to hear not just us speaking at you or giving our experiences and the guests, but also to hear from you. And so tonight we want to welcome you back to the last week of our Privilege series. So tonight we're going to kind of just wrap up things and look and reflect over the series and have a look at what's been meaningful, difficult, fun, exciting, boring, the best, the worst, and everything in between. And so I'm going to ask you guys just to introduce yourselves again in case anyone's joining us for the first time tonight.
Hi everyone, my name is Shoni, part of the Hot Topics team, and it's been great to have you as part of the journey.
Hi, my name is Rebecca, and I'm also a part of the Hot Topics team, and it has been so good.
Thanks, guys. My name is Ilza, and it's just been great to be with you guys tonight again. So I want to ask the first question. I'm going to jump right in because we don't have a lot of time. What inspired this series? I think all of us had at some point, we got together, we decided this is something that's on our hearts and this is something that we really feel is timely for the church. And maybe from each of our own different experiences, what inspired the series and what inspired you in this series?
I think it was so interesting that we actually thought of this question because we decided to do the Privilege series a while ago. About 2 weeks before, or 3 weeks before George Floyd was murdered, we decided that we wanted to do topics on male privilege, white privilege, heterosexual privilege, racism in general, and it was actually, Hloni and I were saying the one day, and Ilse was saying that it felt quite prophetic. And it just so happened that we were ending our one series and starting the new series over the death of George Floyd. And then throughout the series, it was so interesting that things seemed to have happened in the country and in the world that lined up to what we were speaking about. And it could not have been us that designed that, because we had no idea. So I think, first of all, the inspiration behind it, before we even knew what the inspiration was, it was the injustices that was happening around us. We really feel like God planted a seed in our hearts and in our minds to be speaking about these topics, the topics that are shaking the world at its core. And it was scary, you know. It was. There were some weeks where Hloni, myself, and Ilse we felt ill. We were so nervous about what we were speaking on, you know, and not because we didn't believe or stand for what we were speaking on, but because of what people's reactions might be, you know. And I guess the inspiration around it was Jesus, first of all, because Jesus would have spoken about these topics, and second of all was, how do we not stay silent when stuff like this is happening around the world?
And absolutely, Rebecca's right. It is a very prophetic series in the sense of, you know, we found it being aligned to stuff that's happening as though we were writing as life was unfolding, you know. But, you know, even from my side, you know, going into the series, obviously we do project our own struggles into these kind of journeys, you know. And I just remember a couple of years back, I think it was 2013, reading a book that was written by a young girl that had just left the Methodist church because of her questions around issues of social justice. and around issues of discrimination, from be it discrimination against women or racial discrimination against black people, or the unspoken stories around colonization and how it hijacked the Bible story. Reading about that the other day, and I suddenly became aware of stuff that is actually happening around us. I was thinking about how this experience actually unfolded just recently. You know how everyone says children do not see color, but the truth is children do not see color because they are not yet implicated by color at that age. When you are in nursery school, you do not feel that you are a woman. There are those experiences that Elsa spoke about where she's told to wear pants because the boys are looking up her skirt, but you would have not philosophized around that. And when you grow up, I remember getting to high school and suddenly my white friends went into a different direction and I went into a different direction. Boys now know that boys are boys and girls now know that girls are girls. And suddenly you can see all these things beginning to unfold. And it was in those moments that I could say such conversations began stirring up in me. And going into the series, it was those moments that inspired me in terms of my contribution to the series and made me really bring in whatever I brought into the conversation. I honestly worked and spoke from my life experience.
I think for me, it's just been a very timely series as well. We prepared for it, planned for it, but exactly like you guys were saying, like there were things happening in our country at that time where it was just like, now is the time to speak. I've said this a million times before, and I'm sure you guys know this, but I'm not someone who's generally big on social media, but with us going on to online church and everything moving on to online, social media has become something that's unavoidable for me. And so it's not necessarily something I would do in my free time, but it's something that's become so part of my work. And of course, part of that is you start to see what other people are posting. And an aspect of that was just to look at it and say, there's some things that people are posting that's not okay. Or there's inherent issues that are raised that it's time we speak about these things. Or questions that people are asking on social media, literally asking, can someone in my network of 1,000 Facebook friends, can someone point me in a direction to an answer? And that was maybe also around this aspect of privilege. The second thing for me was this year, my heart has really been heavy around issues of justice. I mean, I've been really privileged that I've been able to avoid justice in a sense in my life up to this point, or even to think about it, or to be able to voice things around it, because I've never had to deal with it as other people have lived it out and experienced it. And this year with the coronavirus and how that's rippled through our country, I think issues of justice have just become unavoidable. It's on every corner. It's in every household. It's those things. And that's just really been and carried with me in the series as we've looked at privilege and what that's meant in different spaces.
It's just so interesting that you say that, because I remember before we started Hot Topics, we spoke about how we are in the same storm, but we are in different boats, and I think that was proven not just in the coronavirus example, and this might lead, I think one of our questions is what was the hardest or something, and I don't mean just to jump into that, but just while you were speaking, I was confronted, I came into the series quite arrogant, I would say personally for myself, because the Black Lives Matter movement, male privilege, heterosexual privilege, those are things that I've been passionate about for a while. It wasn't just because of the series. So I came in quite like, oh, Black Lives Matter, yeah, and I just absolutely adore the LGBTQI community. I, obviously as a woman, I definitely identify as a feminist. I have for a while. And I think I came in with an arrogance, And it wasn't until I started having these, with Farai, and when I started having these conversations with Anele and Tandor, that I started realizing that actually there's not this destination that you reach and you are now the wokest person that you've ever been. Farai said some really challenging things to me. I remember I called her just to speak about this, just to speak about her being a guest, and she said, Rebecca, we need to speak about the difference that a black woman faces and the difference that a white woman faces, because a woman is oppressed, definitely, but a white woman is also the oppressor. And I remember I had to sit and juggle with that, and I had to look back at my own activism, and I actually had to realize that actually a lot of my advocacy and a lot of my activism was very much towards the white women, and didn't include black women and black voices. And I had the narrative of my black best friend. And I think in one of these hot topics, I think I did refer to her. I think I did. I spoke about Latifah, and I was so angry at myself because that was the extent of I'm not racist. And then that's when I realized that I have such deep-rooted systemic racism that it outplayed itself on stage. It was no longer hiding. So maybe I think the hardest part for me, which in itself is a privilege, that the hardest part for me was the fact that my racism was unveiled, I almost want to say, And whereas I think that for you it may have been, I know we had quite a few people had issues with what we said that were just straight up racist. People were being racist to Hloni, to your face. And that wasn't something I had to struggle with. I didn't have to struggle with people saying, we actually have an issue with your skin color, and the fact that you're choosing to speak about it, and again, that highlighted even more privilege,
I think Rebecca's right. We all had stuff that we struggled with. Stuff that we struggled with in terms of as someone who is a victim of that kind of discrimination, who's a victim to that kind of discrimination, but also stuff that we struggled with as people who perpetuate that kind of discrimination. A couple of days ago, some of us would have seen that there was a story on one of South Africa's cricketers, famous cricketers, who said some of the stuff he experienced, playing for the national squad, and just reading that, I realized that there's stuff that we internalize. And we somehow want to, because you need to understand that Hloni is not only an activist. Hloni is also someone with dreams, is also someone who wants to make it up the ladder, where no matter what that means, within a Christian space, it would mean that I want to grow in the Lord, I want to grow in my journey, in theological spaces, And so at times, activism can be a hindrance from that. And you learn to lock these things up. You learn to tone down your blackness. You learn to police yourself around black issues. And so when we did this particular series, suddenly that door was opened again. And then I was forced to actually even engage how power dynamics continue to play across racial lines, even in certain spaces where I might be certain that it is not the case. But then also, a beauty that also happened in the middle of all of this is learning to sit down at the feet of those I've discriminated against. Because very often what we do not realize is that one thing I loved, in closing from my side, is one thing I loved about this particular Hot Topics series is that it was raw and unscripted. It was all about people's life experiences, people who have sat in their life experiences, who have thought about their life experiences, who have cried over their life experiences, but have also theologized based on these. And then learning to sit at the feet of those people, learning to sit at the feet of Anela, learning to listen to you guys as women, learning to listen to Nan, learning to listen to Sia, all of those people, and learning to say, I don't have to have an opinion in everything that goes on under the sun, but I can actually sit at people's feet.
Absolutely. I mean, I think something that before we started the series, I actually, in fact, said to Hloni and Rebecca, guys, I don't feel equipped to speak on half of these topics. And we were just kind of discussing who would host and who would do what. And I said to them, guys, I don't even know if I should be in the series. I don't have opinions about these things. I'm not an activist about these things. I don't know nearly enough. And it's that sometimes that fear that holds you back from having these discussions. And something that I've just learned over the series is exactly that, Hloni, that at times it's not about having the opinions. It's not about knowing and being the one who's woke about these issues. It's about being able to actually sit and wrestle with these things. And approach this. I remember it very clearly in the beginning of the series. I said, seek to understand before you seek to be understood, and that's something that stuck with me in the series, and I've seen it over and over, how that's just kind of played out in the conversations. How at times, especially around issues that we struggle with, whether we're aware that we struggle with it or not, at times it's just about sitting and showing up and being active and being in that moment and listening to those conversations. I think some of the conversations where I was the most nervous about, I learned the most in. And it wasn't just because you don't know that you're listening, but it was just a case of saying, I don't need to have it figured out, but I'm here, I'm ready to listen and to learn. And that really helped me in this series.
Yeah, Elsa, I just think it's so important that you say that we learned so much, the three of us, And Hloni just put it so, but we were able to sit at the feet of people and learn from their experiences, whereas if without this series, we wouldn't have been able to have done that, And we still don't know. There's still so much that I have questions about there. And that is what I'm thankful for this series for, is that I'm not walking away from this going, that was a one-time thing, it's a one-time talking about racism, talking about sexuality, speaking about men and how they treat women, and also speaking about how women and how they treat men. I'm not leaving this series in June and July, It has to be with me throughout my life. I have to be able to, because that's the thing about habits, isn't it? So we sit here, we acknowledge them, I acknowledge my systemic racism, I'm reading books, Steve Biko this, But then let's say 2-3 months down the line, it's kind of died down, as it has. Things have died down a little bit. And you start falling into those habits again. You start falling into those racist thoughts that you have. You start falling into those sexist, homophobic thoughts that you have, And I think this series for me has proven that this cannot be June and July. I can't be just speaking about this for 8 weeks, It's that I have to pick up this mantle and run with it forever. And I think now, later we're going to be speaking about the negative comments that we have. But for me, that doesn't matter, And I just think what Ilse highlighted is just so perfect, that we didn't know a lot about it. We still don't know, and we will never get to this destination of wokeness. But we're on the journey.
And I think something that just came out of that for me, exactly that, is even if you feel like you don't know, just don't shy away from those topics. There's been times where it's just been easier to avoid. And I think for me as a young Christian growing up, there's certain aspects of God that we know is true. Stuff like God is just. God has to, because of justice, punish when it's unjust behavior, those types of things. And it's stuff where you don't quite understand it, but it's easy, instead of to grapple with it and trying to figure out and ask about it, it's easier to kind of look at the aspects of faith that we understand. God is a loving God. It's much easier to see God as a loving God necessarily than God is a just God. And that's just something that's been awoken in me for the series, is that at times we have to have those conversations, even if it's difficult. We have to continue to engage those spaces, even when we don't feel like we're able to do it. I've definitely seen an aspect and learned an aspect of God in this, that justice is something that's so important to God. It's not something that we can just shy away from and it be a June, July thing, and we park it, we come back to it once a year in July Justice Month, and the rest of the year we just carry on with God is a loving God. But that God is so big, so great, we cannot ignore these things and still believe that God holds everything. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just what I've learned.
Absolutely, man. And obviously then there were those moments, where we had to struggle with certain, we had to wrestle, but not only on our own, but also when we got what maybe some might call negative feedback. I just can't find the right word to describe it, or to be gracious.
A challenge. We had people challenged us.
We had people.
Yeah, different opinions.
Different
maybe is the
opinion,
thing. Different
yeah.
opinions, different viewpoints, different perspectives at
Different
times. even.
perspectives. Let's be gracious and call it that. So I had a friend of mine say to me, as I was moving from one church to the other, and she asked me, "So what kind of church are you going to?" It's like, "Yeah, it's a mixed church again. People of different races, predominantly white." She's like, "Why do you keep on doing this to yourself?" Because time and again, I would call her when I went through, when I was discriminated against, when there were that power play, all of those things. She said to me, "Hloni, I just don't get it. Why do you keep on doing this to yourself?" And for the first time in quite a while, I was reminded again of that. Why do you do this to yourself? Because there were nights, honestly speaking, where I went to bed, man, and I thought to myself, geez, man, I think I just want to retreat into black spaces right now. There were those nights when I went. And the thing is, as I said, as when you read that South African's story again, when you listen to that interview, you learn that once you've been discriminated against, whether it's because of your race, your gender, your sexuality, whatever it may be owed to, but you learn how to lock stuff, how to keep stuff to yourself. You learn how to police tone yourself so that you can be accepted where you do not have power, where you do not have the bargaining power, around things. And there were those moments. I don't know how you guys managed, in those moments. But one thing that really kept me going in all those moments, is how Jesus in the midst of chaos, while he's been crucified, Jesus doesn't wait for the crucifixion to end till he says, "Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." But it's actually in that moment, but he doesn't shy away from saying, "Forgive them." He doesn't say, "Oh, Lord, forgive them, they see this differently." He still says, "I'm on the right because I'm the one who's been crucified, and you are the one who's stuffing up, but you got to be forgiven."
Yeah, I think that there were so many moments where, specifically when we spoke about white privilege, where we sat in uncomfortable conversations, where I think my privilege was even bigger than I thought. I don't know what word to use, because I sat there in a few meetings with Hloni, and I felt I couldn't understand why Hloni was being so calm. Do you know what I mean? Because people were it was very difficult conversations that we were having, and I'm not going to shy away from that. They were hard conversations that were happening, and I sat there and I just realized how privileged I was that I could just sit there and not get offended. As in for myself, I was highly offended for Hloni. I was highly protective of Hloni. But people weren't coming after something. I can change my accent. I can change my hair color. I cannot change the color of my skin. I cannot change something that God designed of me. And it's like people coming after a woman for their womanhood. It's not something that we chose, but I just remember sitting in meetings and in conversations being like, what, I actually can't believe we're having these conversations in 2020. In the year 2020, when the coronavirus is happening, honestly, I couldn't believe that I was having these conversations. But grace, like Hloni said, shone through it, and we saw people change. We saw people grab on. I think, for me personally, I think there were even a few times I was offended on the stage, where about my womanness, speaking about that, where I think, Hloni, there were a few times where I was like, no, how can you say that? And I'm sure there were moments where you were like, as a white person, how can you say that, And it was challenging, I think, to walk away here some days and be like, people really think this, And it was traumatic. I must say there were many moments where I just wanted to cry.
I think it was definitely challenging at times. And what really helped me through this, to not take away from either what either of you said but just to realize that people are on a journey. You know, sometimes we find them at the start of the journey, and we're the ones that help them onto the journey. At times we find them in the middle when they're backsliding back to what their thoughts and what they experience. And sometimes we find people at the end, and it's much easier sometimes, if there is even such a thing as the end, you know. But it's easier to engage people at certain points on the journey. But that doesn't mean we should stop going and engaging with them. At times it was really difficult. At times it is really difficult. And I don't think it's wrong to be offended at times. Because I think it's in those feelings. I really believe that God has given us emotions for a reason. And that's at times to wake up and say, there's something wrong here. There's something right here, you know. And I think we need to feel those emotions at times. And so maybe as we start closing up for today, the question we need to ask ourselves is, where did you see glimpses of Jesus in this series? Where did you see Jesus? And what were those really powerful moments for you where you really felt like you were sitting at the feet of Jesus, as if hearing him speak, you know?
It's just so interesting that you asked that, because I found my glimpses of Jesus in my offense, which I know sounds a bit funny, but when I had to walk away from meetings, or when I had to walk away from the stage, I have my primary emotion at the time is anger. Like, I have a lot of stuff I have to work through there, but I'd walk away furious and done with the church, done with the people, absolutely livid. And that's where I found Jesus, you know, because let's not kid ourselves, all right? Jesus was discriminated against. And let's not kid ourselves when we say Jesus is a brown-skinned man, you know, from Nazareth. You know, so Jesus does find, like, there are things that are said that are highly offensive. And I found myself in these spaces going, I do not deserve grace. I'm a fallen, sinful person. You know, yet Jesus extended grace to me in the moments where I definitely didn't deserve it, you know. And I would say the only way that I could finish this, it sounds so dramatic, it sounds like we've been to war or something, honestly, I sound so dramatic. But the only way that I could end this race strong and end this series strong actually was, I had to lean on Jesus for it. And I think I speak for all three of us when I say this. The spiritual attacks that we went through in this 8-week series, it wasn't just humans that disagreed with us, you know. I know for myself, last week, just to be vulnerable, I didn't sit on the second last series because I had had such an intense week of just no rest, as in not physical rest, but just no spiritual rest, that I was so exhausted. And the only way that I could continue was Jesus. You know?
Absolutely, man. I think for me, where I really also just want to start off is by saying there is something beautiful about learning to see one another. You know, we spend so much of life, so much of our time doing life just looking over one another. You know, we coexist. I acknowledge your presence. But there is something beautiful that happens when we learn to see each other. So, firstly, just learning to see people, learning to see females, and learning to see them means I do not see them as what Clooney wants to see them as, but learning to genuinely see people, learning to see people of different sexualities. It creates a beautiful space for authentic relationships to be established. That was the first thing, you know. But then I also found Jesus in the margins. By reclaiming my space in the margins. James Cone writes a beautiful book, and he speaks about the cross and the lynching tree. And anyone who's read that book would say, Jesus for black people. And I find it problematic that people actually find offense in the statement that Jesus for black people is still on the cross. And this is the same Jesus that you come across in Revelations. John, in Revelations, when the church is going through a time of persecution, does not speak about a Jesus who is resurrected. But he says, I saw the Lamb. And he looked as though he had just been slaughtered. He speaks about that Lamb that he sees. And again, I was able to reclaim my place in the Friday audience of Jesus' crucifixion. Finding my place in the margins again, because it is from that space that my story is written towards Sunday.
Beautiful. I think where I've really gotten a sense of Jesus in this series has been, so Jesus tells us parable. It's called Parable of the Banquet. And he speaks about this this guy who hosts this banquet, invites people, and the people RSVP, and they say they're coming, and then on the day, the banquet is ready, and no one shows up. Everyone makes excuses. I can't come. And this man does not say, well, fine, I'll keep it to myself then. But instead he says, go out and fetch the people. Fetch them from every corner, every hilltop, every mountain. Go fetch everyone. And they're still invited to the table. And that's almost where I've gotten this glimpse of Jesus in the series, is that regardless of where we are, regardless of whether we make excuses to come to the table or not, the table is open. And that's exactly this. These conversations are necessary to be had. If we really want to bring people to know Christ, we can't just bring them from where it's convenient. We can't just have conversations which feel comfortable for us, because that's not where we meet people, where they need Jesus. We meet them in the difficult conversations, in the ones that make us uncomfortable, and we bring them in by bringing them to the table and knowing that Christ is in those situations with us. And that's really where I've seen Jesus in this series.
The series has set the standard for us that we can't ignore. We've spoken about really hard topics, and I feel a weight or a duty, what a dramatic word, to continue speaking about I can no longer go back to how the coronavirus affects us, because it is going to affect us. It has affected us, and I'm not saying in any case that is not something that needs to be acknowledged. We are still in a pandemic, and for the foreseeable future. But I'm ruined for the ordinary. I'm ruined to just speak about, John 3:16. Do you know what I mean? I'm ruined for it. I want to speak about things that absolutely stir something in me. That there's a song, "Break My Heart for What Breaks Yours." I have to go. That prayer hits differently now. It's no longer break my heart for what breaks yours. Like when I see someone, begging on the side of the road, you know what I mean? It is heartbreaking for Jesus. But why is that person begging on the side of the road? Like, it's no longer just, break my heart for the poor. It's break my heart for the poor, and actually the chains of oppression that came before that actually made that person stand there at that robot, stripped of their dignity, to beg for money. I don't want to just understand. I don't want to just give you R5 when I'm at the robot. I do want to do that, but I also want to understand, why in the world are you in this position and not me?
Absolutely, Rebecca. I think that is so important, man. And as we wrap up, it's what you and Elsa's really one thing that just comes into mind, especially with the scripture that you mentioned, Els, when you say, Jesus has this banquet and then people do not come. You find that when the status quo is cool for us, it's really cool for us to just ignore the voice of Jesus that is inviting us onto certain tables to speak around certain issues. But when we learn to find our place in the margins, because one way or the other, we're all there. Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the story of Jesus, we are all there. The fact that I discriminate against women might be what lands me in the margins. I might then realize through that okay, I'm not as close as I think I am to Jesus' table, and therefore I need to be better. But whatever it may be, I think what is important, something that I really took from this series, and I just want to encourage everyone, at home, is, man, at times the invitation to have awkward conversations, at times the invitation to ask difficult questions is something that we don't want to listen to, something that we don't want to hear, it's something that we don't want to respond to. But if anything, please do come through in future. It's a nice table. And yeah, I think it was a beautiful series.
I think it was a great series. And so maybe as we wrap up this series, we can just kind of let you know what's happening next week. We are we're not going back to the light topics. We're keeping it at those topics that we want to speak about, that we feel needs to be spoken about and sometimes are strayed away from. So from next week, we want to invite you to join us for our new series called Can Christians? And we're going to be exploring a whole bunch of taboo topics. And you'll find out more about that next week. But we really want to invite you to carry on this journey with us. And we'll see you again then next week for that conversation. Please join us again for our Tuesday discussions, and then also next week for our Sunday evening hot topics. We hope you have a wonderful week, and then we'll see you then.